Welcome to another episode of Casus Belli Baby. I'm your host, Cam Ray. Last week we discussed Abraham and his rescue of Lot as being possibly the world's first military special operation ever conducted in recorded history. Today we'll discuss briefly, we'll do a part one about Moses, the military organizer. So let us begin. The story of Israel's bondage in Egypt is well known and often retold around the time of Easter and Passover. Ministers, rabbis, theologians, and social historians line up to make a historical and moral, or not so historical and moral, case for the events that transpired. It's obvious from the Bible that the Israelites under Joseph and many others lived quite well and enjoyed their stay in Egypt. After Joseph died and a generation or so passed, a new king of Egypt arose who knew not the legacy or accomplishments of Joseph or his people, the Israelites. It is not known who this king was. Whoever it was obviously saw the Israelites as unknown foreigners but allowed them to stay. On the other hand, the king who expelled the Hyksos from Egypt, or perhaps his previous successor, saw the Israelites as a threat due to their past loyalties. The accepted view is that once Joseph died, the new king of Egypt enslaved the Israelites. However, this does not seem to be the case. Even though the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verses 13 through 14 state that, quote, "The Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, wherein they made them serve, was with rigor." End quote. Most who read this passage use it to prove that the Israelites were slaves. This may not be entirely true. Slaves or freemen? Military historian Richard A. Gabriel, in his book Military History of Ancient Israel, said, quote, "The Hebrew term used to describe the Israelites at their labors is avadim, which is an obscure and irregular usage, can connote slaves, but which more commonly translates as workmen or workers or even servants." End quote. The linguistic argument is interesting but not definitive. He is right. The term is not definitive. Furthermore, the books of Exodus and Numbers suggest otherwise. In the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verse 3, the Hebrews grumble for being taken out of Egypt, stating, quote, "We wish Adonai had used his hand to kill us off in Egypt. There we used to sit around the pots with meat boiling, and we had as much food as we wanted. But you have taken us out into the desert to let this whole assembly starve to death." End quote. In the book of Numbers, chapter 11, verse 5, the Hebrews continued saying, quote, "We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt. It cost us nothing, and the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic, but now we're withering away. We have nothing to look at but this man." End quote. The term avadim, along with how the Hebrews felt after leaving Egypt, speaks volumes and raises many questions concerning their status among the Egyptians. The real issue is whether slavery was an institution in Egypt. The answer is yes and no, but with a twist. There are two ways of looking at slavery when it comes to ancient Egypt. Were the Hebrews slaves in Egypt? The answer is yes and no. Understand that the Hebrews were not subservient to the Egyptians, but to the state, i.e. Pharaoh. Therefore, the nature of slavery in Egypt, according to Abraham, or Besdin, quote, "operated like a technological machine, which all people reduced to useful cogs." End quote. At the time of the Exodus, Egypt possibly had a population of useful cogs between 7 and 9 million people. This seems a bit much. Nevertheless, such a population could easily man and staff the military and governmental jobs needed to secure the kingdom and to work the pharaonic projects without hindrance. There was no shortage of manpower, and the need for a system dependent on slavery was virtually unheard of. Moreover, the Egyptian religion and law forbid slavery for the most part. But during wars of conquest and occupation, the defeated armies were enslaved. The difference is slaves in Egypt were not devoid of rights. They could own property, they could employ their own servants. If there was one setback, it was that their freedom of movement was restricted. When it comes to slavery being truly an established norm, the Greeks are said to be the first to introduce house slaves when they occupied Egypt between the 3rd and 1st century BCE. However, the story of Joseph being a slave in Potiphar's house suggests otherwise. To say Egypt during the time of pharaohs did and didn't have slaves is correct. The fact that Pharaoh was viewed as God on earth made every resource and human under his rule his property. Therefore, the evidence indicates that the Israelites in the land of Goshen were the property of the Pharaoh. However, depending on your status, as in occupation, which is questionable, the Israelites, for a period each year, eventually became lesser than free men and a little higher than a slave, which puts them in the pool of corvée labor, which means community service tax in the form of forced labor. But even this comes with a word of caution, for the native Egyptians were treated in the same manner. What about their economic value? Regardless of their status, their skills were quite valuable to the Egyptians. Understand that the Israelites were not a tribe of Bedouins herding animals, but a semi-pastoral community. The Israelites were a highly skilled social complex, for they were a sub-branch of the Hebrew, as mentioned in the Abraham piece. The draft labor assigned to Pharaoh's construction projects would work for 3 months, starting in September and ending in November. Agriculture at the time was impossible due to the Nile flood, which provided a large pool of unemployed workers. These usually assigned to construction projects from the agricultural base stayed locally, while those who were military conscripts, who did not meet the standard of being assigned to combat or regular force units, were given the duties of constructing great temples, government buildings, military force, and maintaining irrigation systems. The unemployed were temporarily hired, fed, and provided medical assistance by military doctors who were assigned to these crews to make sure that the workers were fit and healthy. While the Israelites provided the Egyptian economy with additional economic means, the Egyptians also saw them as political tools to help expand Pharaoh's state via political means, as in military service. Besides having an economic value, the Israelites also have a strategic and military value in all this. Another aspect besides their agriculture and pastoral value was that they provided the host kingdom military service. Remember that in the book of Genesis, chapter 47, verse 6, Pharaoh told Joseph, quote, "I will let them live anywhere they choose in the land of Egypt, but I suggest that they settle in Goshen. The best part of our land I would also like for your finest shepherds to watch after my own sheep and goats." End quote. Of course, Pharaoh knew best. The Hebrew were often settled on the border of a state to protect the host nation from foreign aggression, like the Hebrews. While Goshen being the best land to exploit, it was the best land to place foreign peoples. Pharaoh not only understood the economic value of placing the Israelites in Goshen, but also understood from a strategic point of view that it would keep them at arm's length from the host kingdom if anything were to go wrong, and provided a buffer between Egypt and any potential foreign threat coming from the land of Canaan. Canaan served as a strategic land bridge that connected Africa with Asia. The military value of the Hebrew people goes without question. The Egyptians saw them providing a valuable military service as hired mercenaries. What set the Hebrew apart from the Egyptians and many others is that the military arm of the community was distinct from the herdsmen, agriculturalists, and tradesmen. For example, when a Canaanite king hired some mercenary Hebrew soldiers to protect certain regions, they'd bring their kinsmen who would settle in the area, i.e., like Joseph. When he brought his family to settle in Egypt, he would not only provide valuable trade skills, but also security. Therefore, even though each Hebrew clan had a military wing, that wing not only provided security, but also was involved with the day-to-day duties of tending farmlands and herding. As for the Hebrew who provided a military arm to the Egyptians, the question that needs addressed is, what asset did they provide besides securing the borderlands of Egypt? The answer is they provided the Egyptians with a force multiplier with their expertise in clandestine and guerrilla-style combat. The Hebrew were not incapable of fighting in open war, as the Sumerians mentioned that they fought as foot soldiers in conjunction with chariots, but were not themselves charioteers or chariot archers. The Hebrew were best suited in providing the Egyptians what they did best, silence and stealth, and that was collecting intelligence, hit and run, raids, ambush, and surprise attack, which earned them the respect and made them equals with the Egyptian troops. So what happened with the Israelites? Everything seems to be going good for them. Well, fall from grace, right? Even though the Hebrews were equal among the Egyptians for some time, they eventually fell out of favor. Once this new Pharaoh came to power that knew not the Israelites began to grumble. There is no doubt that when Joseph proved himself a capable man before Pharaoh and the Egyptian administration, naturally he would have brought in his people to help and serve. Over time, many Hebrews rose to the military and administrative ranks of the Egyptian government. But there came a time when a new Pharaoh rose, whoever he may be, who knew not Joseph or the children of Israel, as mentioned. This brings up another question. Did this Pharaoh really know not Joseph's accomplishments or the Israelites? The answer is no. Behold, the people of the children of Israel more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And if it come to pass that, when they falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of our land. End quote. The Israelites had multiplied greatly. Archaeological evidence in the eastern delta show clear evidence that the Asiatic population grew prosperous and multiplied even after Joseph died. The vast numbers due to the boom in the regional economy, which allowed for the population boom, threatened not only Egypt but those in power. While this covers the increased population, the mightier term used by Pharaoh means that many Israelites held a far greater number of government positions, which made them a threat. Because of this, there was the potential that they could undermine the authority of Pharaoh, for they had the numbers and influence to back a substantial army. Moreover, and lest we forget, the Israelites were settled in the land of Goshen, rented to them not only to exploit the land, but to provide a buffer between Egypt and the undesirables to the north. If that region were lost to the Israelites could invite many others sympathetic to their cause to overthrow Pharaoh. Pharaoh may have had reasonable suspicion to be concerned with the rise of the Israelites within his administration and influence they had, or perhaps Pharaoh was just paranoid. Regardless of Pharaoh's feelings, he still held power to dictate his will without question. He was, at least in the eyes of the Egyptians, God incarnate. Therefore, Pharaoh put out a decree and, quote, set over them taskmasters to affect them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses, end quote. One issue before continuing is the building of these cities and the name Ramses. The first thing to address is that both cities were already in existence, except that city called Ramses was actually known as Avaris, and Avaris was in the heart of the land of Goshen. Pithom, or Pit-Atum, if I'm pronouncing that right, was also in the land of Goshen. The Egyptian archaeologist, the Egyptologist David Rowe, mentions the reason for this mistake and states, quote, there is every reason to believe that the mention of the building of Pithom and Ramses in Exodus chapter 1 verses 11 is anachronistic, a later addition to the biblical text by a redactor or editor, possibly the 7th century BC during the reign of King Josiah of Judah. The reason why I think this is the case is that we have just such an example of an editorial anachronism in the book of Genesis, which mentions the region of Ramses centuries before any pharaoh of that name, end quote. A question remains. With the cities well into existence, what were the Israelites tasked to build at Avaris and Pithom? The answer is military posts. The pharaoh who may have ordered the Israelites to build these posts may have been none other than Pharaoh Khnafre, if I'm pronouncing his name right. According to the latter half of the 3rd or 2nd century BCE, Hellenistic writer Artapanus of Alexandria, who wrote a work titled Concerning the Jews, the construction was meant to police the Israelites and to protect Egypt's northern borders from outsiders who may have seen the Israelites as allies. In the past, the need to police the Hebrews was not necessary, for the Israelites protected Egypt's northern approaches. However, that was about to change. The reality is the Israelites were always tasked to perform some sort of compensated corvée labor when factoring in that they farmed, raised herds, and provided security for the pharaonic state. But the same could be said about the Egyptians. The only difference is the Israelites were assigned additional tasks to perform later on. These additional or extended work projects went from corvée to unpaid forced labor, according to the Bible, going from freemen who were at times assigned to partake in state projects to what appears to be forced labor suggests the political and economic health of the pharaonic state was in disarray, and suspicions arose concerning non-Egyptians living within the country. Pharaoh saw that no matter how hard he pushed the Israelites, they continued to multiply at an alarming rate. The rigorous tasks assigned to the Israelites brought ill health. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, and he said, when ye do the office of the midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stoles. If it be a son, then you shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live." End quote. It was selective slaughter aimed at reducing the Hebrew male population, but in what perhaps could be the very first act of civil disobedience recorded, because the women refused. The Israelite population continued to multiply. Pharaoh, knowing that the Hebrew women would not murder their own sons, decided that if they would not obey his orders, then the state would do the murder for them by casting any Israelite baby boy into the river while saving the lives of the females. Because of this, one woman would save her child by hiding him for 3 months before placing him in an ark of bulrushes, keeping an eye on the infant, waiting to see what would happen. To her surprise, the daughter of Pharaoh discovered the child and took him in, naming him Moses. And that's where we'll leave off until next time. The next part of this story about Moses, we're going to look at Moses the warrior. Alright, if you like this little mini lecture, give me a thumbs up. Leave your comments below. No fighting, of course. I'll leave references in the description. Please go ahead and share this. And until next time.